Hello and welcome to another 5-9 Gaming video. I am Goresh, and today I'm joined by Nozdarachi, Nolar, and Soviet Super Saiyan. If you like what you see, you like this content, please make sure and go down and give us a subscription as well as a like on the video, and let us know in the comment section how you think our content is coming along. But this time, we will be talking about Diablo 4's most recent quarterly update from the developers over at Blizzard Entertainment. So we saw Diablo 4 initially released or revealed, not released, but revealed over at BlizzCon 2019. So a little bit over a year ago. That was back in November. And they've sort of been trickling in this info to us via quarterly updates throughout the year that generally they haven't really had much to discuss, but this one in particular has had some interesting things to talk about. So before we jump into the points that we have laid out here, anything you guys want to mention about the quarterly updates that they've put out?
I haven't been keeping up with this game too much since the infamous "Don't you guys have phones?" BlizzCon announcement for all the festivities they had going on. Of course, some of that goes hand in hand with the mobile game, which we haven't seen hide nor hair of yet either. But as a Diablo fan, a lifelong Diablo fan, probably sunk at least like 2,000 to 3,000 hours into Diablo 2. I am excited for the game. But I haven't honestly been keeping too much tabs with what they've been putting out. I'm kind of one of the people that likes to wait until, you know, the whole picture has come into focus before I really start getting my hype levels going.
For me, I've been following it, briefly here and there. Again, like Goresh said, the quarterly updates have just been pretty sparse. I think one of them was literally, hey, we moved the UI around from the sides to the middle or vice versa, and that was it. And it was just very, very sparse. So this is
extremely violent.
Yeah, this is the first big chunk of an update that, there's a lot of information, some changes that were proposed that are different from when they first revealed it last year at BlizzCon. So there's been development, so that's a good sign.
Yeah, I've been following them here and there. I'm kind of like Nas, where until everything's out, until we start seeing more gameplay and more concrete things, I'm not putting too much weight into them. But it's nice that they're at least, giving us updates along the development cycle, whereas a lot of developers just don't tell you anything till it's all done.
Yeah, I actually agree with that as well. Like, we see these games get announced, and then 2 years go by, and they're like, "Oh yeah, by the way, remember us that we announced our game 2 years ago? We're actually, we've made some progress since then." Yeah, this one is actually like a fairly consistent stream of information, even though the information hasn't always been very
substantial.
I guess, yeah, substantial, like we just said with the UI thing. But at least they're giving us something, and they're telling us they're not being like unrealistic with what they're doing. Like they're telling us what they're working on, and that's fine. So really, taking a look at the actual article itself, there's really a few areas that, at least to me, captured my attention, being a longtime fan of the series. Just so, for a little background, I played Diablo 2, I played Diablo 1, this was a long time ago, and obviously most recently the Diablo 3 has been the main Diablo title I've played, and I do have like close to 900 or so hours in Diablo 3, I think, at this point. So very, very seasoned player when it comes to Diablo stuff. So when I saw a lot of the topics that they talked about in this game, I was sort of thinking back to, okay, how was my experience playing Diablo 3, and what can they really, improve upon the experience that I had playing that game. So the first sort of topic I want to talk about is the whole issue of the skill tree that they brought up here in the article. And the main point that I want to discuss is the ability to quickly change from one spec to another without it costing anything at all from Diablo 3, essentially, in my experience, destroyed class identity. In my opinion, classes should have their roles and identities be pretty unique throughout different areas of the game. So when every class can all of a sudden fulfill every single role, there's no sense of place for that class in the game. So what they're talking about in the skill tree section is that, as you start out, it's going to be easy to respec from one spec to another, but then as you grow and your character becomes more powerful and stronger, and as you make your way to the end of the game, it's going to become progressively more difficult and more expensive to respec your character, which I think is a good thing, because like I just said, if you're able to just do everything, and if every class is able to fulfill every role, it just takes away from the feeling of you having your own class identity. So that's sort of what I think about that. What do you guys think?
I agree. Coming from mostly a Diablo 2 standpoint, my entire character box in Diablo 2 was filled with different characters. Like I had my Magic Find Sorceress, my Magic Find Paladin, my PvP Barbarian and Druid, my Assassin that I just like to mess around with in PvE. There would be so many different characters and multiple ways to build your character within that class for different things you wanted to accomplish in the game. Pretty much all of that was lost when it came to Diablo 3. Like, you could just run a sorcerer. That's what I did. I had some different gear I could throw on there when I wanted to do some magic find. But essentially, it was just get the best gear available, kill things as quickly as you can, and really the only illusion of choice in that game was which spells did you want to main and combine to most effectively clear, those endgame rifts, right? So there wasn't much variety in terms of the builds and the itemization in Diablo 3, and to see them kind of go back a step, but, in terms of going back but then enhancing it, this is something that actually has me pretty excited, because I can actually have, my Barbarian for when I want to tank and brute force content, and then maybe I'll have another character when I need to fulfill different roles. So I'm actually pretty excited about this, no lie.
For me, the respecking in D3, it was a pretty novel idea where it didn't cost anything, but it ultimately just meant I had one character and that was it. And I got all the gear and I could do different builds, but it never made me have 5 barbarians or 5 sorcerers, back in D2, so to run different builds. So to me, as an old D2, D1 player, I was like, yeah, I'd rather do that. I'd like to customize each character to fulfill specific roles as opposed to having just one being the jack of all trades. And to me, that's kind of like part of the burnout. I think the majority of the D3 players that start a new season, they get real hyped for the new specs and the builds, and they start off bang at the beginning of the season. Then a week later, like for me, I lose interest. And I think 90% of the players who aren't trying to hit the top of the leaderboards, they just lose interest and that's it, So doing these respecking this way, making it more expensive. Again, it's just costing a lot of investment. I'm just curious to see what kind of investment. Is that just gold sinks? Because in Diablo 3, gold was like you could get so much gold and have no idea to do with it. But then eventually they start putting gold sinks in, and you can do fishing for rifts or whatever the case may be. Sure, but I'm just kind of curious to see what is significant investment. Is it like materials that we need to farm that would be useful for other things in your build? Or is it just something that's like, oh yeah, you can respec if you want, you just gotta get 100 of these things, and it has no other use than respecking. So it'll be interesting to see.
You kind of touched on it without saying it, but the only reason for you to create a new character in Diablo 3, period, was the start of a new season, because they made you. Like, you can't reuse your old character. It's a new season. Besides that, there is no reason to have multiple different characters whatsoever. So that, I didn't really like that. I don't mind the ladder, the seasons, the resetting, but that being the only motivation to start a new character.
Yep.
Yeah, that's kind of a poo-poo on that idea. And this new system seems much better. Especially because you consider they could, keep working in the ladders and you having to reset, but then you'll have all these different options and stuff. So definitely replayability should go way up because of this.
Yeah, what I like is it kind of seems like in Diablo 3, when you can just switch what you're using at a given with no cost, it makes any action or choice that you make that has no consequence, then you have you don't care about it, and you don't have the satisfaction of, I invested in this character early on and it ended up paying off. When you just don't care about what you're choosing at some point, that just kind of boards you of it, where I don't know, I personally like games where min-maxing a character really can come into play. So it seems like they're going a little more towards that, and I like it.
Yeah, me too. I think that's a good concept for a good direction for the game to go in as well. And then the second topic that I want to harp on are the stats, and I think the actual title they use for the section is primary stats in the actual update itself. And historically, taking a look at again, past Diablo games, especially Diablo 3. Determining which stats you wanted to invest in for your character was a very easy thing to do. All you did was you pretty much just chose the main stat for your character and you were done. For your class also. If you were a barbarian, you're not going to pick intellect. You're not going to pick dexterity. You're going to pick strength every single time. If you're a wizard in D3, you picked intellect every time. If you were a monk in D3, you picked dexterity. So it was very cut and dry. There was no choice or thought involved whatsoever. You just went with the main stat of your class. So in terms of there being a choice for your character, there pretty much wasn't any. And now, based on what they're saying in this quarterly update article, they are adding specific thresholds. And this when I read this article, this was like the first thing that really got me excited, because they're adding specific thresholds to be met by a bunch of different stats, therefore encouraging you not only to invest in that one best stat, which is, in my opinion, a nice step in the right direction. So, for example, if you're a barbarian, you're obviously going to still want to invest in strength because it's your primary way of doing damage, as well as having defense in this game. But if there's like a certain threshold that you want to meet with intelligence, that's going to give you like a spike in survivability, you're probably going to also want to invest in intelligence a little bit. And that really does remind me of some other ARPGs. Like I know in PoE, Path of Exile, they have items in the game, and those items all have a minimum stat requirement to equip. So, for example, if you find a really good pair of gloves, but you can't use them because they have, you need to have like twice the amount of intellect that you have, you're forced to then, reevaluate how you've invested your stats on that character if you want to use those gloves. So I think having those choices in the game is going to actually make you think about, okay, is this the right build that I want to go? Do I want to, reinvest a lot of these points that I've spent in my character to, utilize the stuff that I found, the items that I found.
The most important thing too is, based on the article, they're also harping on the skill tree. So it's basically saying certain paths are quote unquote locked behind minimal thresholds, which means if you want to do a specific build, you might need to put some on your barbarian. You might have to put some points into intelligence, right? So yeah, that's pretty cool because that'll give you build diversity and a different way to play that same character. So, to me, that's really cool. And again, in D3, even if you leveled up, like in just your level 1 to 70, your stats were automatically distributed. While in D2, what I loved about it was like, okay, for the most part, it's fairly simple. And this is like a 20-plus-year-old game we're talking about. But it was like, I'm a barbarian. I'm going to put all my stats into strength and vitality. But now they're kind of evolving on that concept where like every level you gain, you're going to get some more stats, and you get to decide what to do, because depending on the skill tree and your build, you might need some stats into vitality or intelligence, or what else do they have? Willpower, dexterity, whatever it is.
Strength, intelligence, willpower, dexterity. Vitality is gone altogether. Okay. So
yeah, so I don't know. To me, that's really cool because there's like multiple facets of how you could build a character. And depending on the item too, like some items, like at least in Path of Exile from what I played, they had a minimum stat requirement. I was like, I don't have enough dexterity, like I can't use this weapon. But maybe in a couple levels I'll have enough, and then blah 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 blah. I could do this other build. So whatever, for me, ARPGs are fun, but the best part about it is the team building or the builds, right? Like how you can make your character play differently or more effective or in whatever play style. So that gets me excited.
Yeah, I'm actually showing it on screen, but it is really interesting. Like Gresh mentioned in the beginning, back in D2 days, in most of D3, you didn't really have too much choice there, but you would just spec like a main stat. But now, barbarians actually benefit greatly from willpower and dexterity. Something like dexterity was like pretty much what monk only, like monks, Amazons, assassins back in the day.
Yeah, monks and demon.
So now the barbarian gets substantial increases to his critical strike chance by stacking dex. He'll get by stacking willpower, which is primarily like the mage intelligence and willpower. Were usually like the mage stats. Increases the resource generation, which I would assume would be like his like rage meter, whatever the barbarian's like mana bar functions off of, and it improves his healing. So there's definitely, I would say for most characters, you're going to be looking at like a dual like stat build. Like you're going to be focusing one, and then you'll have like a secondary off stat. But even with the barbarian here, it's got his points spread across 3 stats. Basically, intelligence is really the only thing that you can possibly go a little bit lower with on the barbarian. And down here, scrolling down to all these different skills, like they mentioned, the skills all have sub-modifiers. So like for a barbarian specifically, you get Whirlwind, iconic move where he just spins around in a circle. But should you stack 150 dexterity points into your barbarian, you also then gain access to the whirlwind upgrade, which no longer slows the barbarian's movement speed, which actually goes pretty well with the theme of dexterity. And then if you get up to 225 strength and dexterity, you get a critical strike damage by 10% increase. So I'm assuming, this is just a very small slice. They show this off for the Whirlwind ability and then the Ice Blades Conjuration ability for the Sorceress, or whatever the spell casting class is called here. I'm assuming like every skill is going to have different stuff like this. So there's going to be a huge range of options for not only building your character, but then what tweaks you want to make to the abilities to go back and, like Soviet said, to min-max your character's effectiveness. So there'll be a lot more diversity in this game than Diablo 3. Just even at a glance, you can tell it's going to be like double the diversity, if not even more.
Yeah, to me it seems like with this, they're almost pushing like they're have your main classes, but then depending on what like you spec into with your stats, almost have like subclasses for like the barbarian and stuff like that, even if they're not explicitly saying, hey, everyone has subclasses. But that's just kind of what it seems like to me.
Yeah, I agree with that. And like we even go back to the skill tree thing that we were talking about earlier. Like I could even see, depending on how long they intend on making the leveling process in this game, like what if there was a threshold you can meet with a barbarian where it's like, oh, if you have like I don't know, like 90 intelligence, you can all of a sudden become like this ridiculously powerful barbarian by picking up this one talent node that's like really overpowered for your level or something. So maybe instead of specking strength initially on a barbarian, you want to instead spec intelligence just so that you can grab that.
Yeah, where like early on it'll be harder, but then if you stick with it long enough, it just pays off to something crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, that gets it's really cool because just in my mind, looking at the barbarian, right? The stats of like willpower is resource regeneration and healing received. So to me, that's like infinite whirlwind where you just stack life leech, right, and crit.
I was about to say the life
steal build. So you could easily do that kind of build and gear your barbarian towards the end, where hey, that's gonna be good. And again, there's gonna be peaks and valleys in the leveling process. So like Soviet said, sometimes it might be a pain in the first like 10, 15, 20 levels, but it pays off when you get to the mid game, and then it like eases you towards the late game. While some builds are great for early game, but they just suck in the middle, and then they finally see their power spike in the late game. So look, it just gets my mind flowing, and I love it because it's just like, oh, what kind of builds can I do? What's going to be great for leveling? What's going to be great for end game content? So just, yeah,
that's a whole nother layer that we don't even know about. Like I know in one of the previous updates, they briefly mentioned like some type of world raid boss type events in this game. So you might even have a character, 2 barbarians that you run, and one of them is spec'd to help people and magic find in PvE world events, like in a 1v1 style. And then you have your second barbarian you bring in for like AoE damage and crowd control, like just based off of, the people you're running with need different things. So it almost brings back a little bit of that feel of almost World of Warcraft, but, simplified, but just where different people are needed for different roles and different events and stuff, which could add some really unique value to your character and could also lead to you making some new friends and stuff too, which is always great.
Yep.
And then the last sort of topic I want to talk about, and in the article itself, it's called weapon types. I'm just going to call it items. The biggest takeaway that I took from this portion was the fact that they don't specifically want legendaries to instantly, by default, be the best possible options for every character and every build in the game. So back in the early days of Diablo 3, right when the game released, rare items were, in a lot of cases, much better than a lot of the legendary items in the game, even if they didn't really roll that well, because a lot of the legendaries in the game weren't really well designed. And if you got lucky with those rare items, they ended up being, like, honestly, some of the best items in the game. Like, I remember back in the beginning of D3, the best items you could have were rare items for weapons. And then slowly, over the course of the game's lifespan, that sort of just evolved into legendaries and set items, specifically becoming the only things you looked for. And I think right now, I haven't played the game in a while, but I'm pretty sure right now, like, set items, if you're not using, like, a bunch of different set items, you're just not optimal. So I think that takes away, again, going back to my discussion on the class identity, if every single class is played the same, then like it just doesn't give you a sense of uniqueness with how you want to play the game. So like, if by far the best build in the game is like one specific whirlwind build for a barbarian, and it requires this set item, and you have to get the set bonus that requires like 4 other set items, then guess what? Every single person is going to be using the exact same build, playing the exact same class, and the exact same setup. And that's just boring. So the fact that they have specifically mentioned that they want to make rare items, at least not as good as most legendaries, but give it a chance to make rare items, at least somewhat viable again, is pretty exciting to me.
Yeah, it almost brings up, and this is a much loved and hated debate, but that they've had that whole auction house in Diablo 3, and it was neat at first because you would see a bunch of different items that you wouldn't expect to be valuable that just rolled with really good stats that ended up being very coveted. But like Gresh said, as the game went on, they removed the auction house, they streamlined everything into getting sets and the ancient legendaries and the mythic items. And now it seems like they are completely reworking that system to diversify your potential options in the game. Now, more often than not, you will probably be running legendaries and uniques on your characters, but there could be that offhanded chance that you get some rare weapon that just rolls perfectly and could even outpace some of the, better named or unique gear in the game. That's pretty exciting for me as a game that's always about loot. Diablo, you play Diablo because you enjoy killing stuff and looting. Like, there's not really too much more appeal to the game. I mean, it's a lot deeper than that. It's a very surface level analysis of it, but having just this more diversity and the chance that everything blue and yellow you see isn't just an instant sell, that it adds a lot of value to doing your Magic Find runs, because you're not just looking for potentially one specific thing for hours and hours and hours. You could get a lot of surprise gear, and again, that adds more replay value and a reason for me to want to go back and kill Mephisto 30,000 times, and maybe I'll get something that I've never seen before.
Yeah, the issue with D3 was, like, in the beginning, like you said, there were so many different builds that you kind of had to change your build based on an item you got or you bought from the auction house, one of the two. But now then, after, was it like the 2.0 update where they added rifts and all that kind of stuff, they streamlined it, so it was basically a very cookie cutter build. Like, people were you got a set build plus a couple legendaries, and that was it. And then from there on, the reason why I got bored of it is because the ladders were exactly the same. That was the issue I ran into with D3, where all the builds, they just ran the same set items. Maybe they rolled a little bit better than yours, so that's why they're ahead of you. Or they rolled an ancient version of it with like perfect stats, or primal ancient, which is like the max stats on things. And you're just like, well, I wish I could get a primal ancient, but this is the build that demon hunters are running, and if I want to be on the top of the leaderboards, I gotta grind longer, or use a bot, which don't use bots, but that's what people did, or just keep grinding to get better ancient legendaries and primal ancients and stuff like that, and it just became boring. So that's why after like a week or two, that was it. Now with this, if they start to do leaderboards, and I'm sure they will with seasons, it'll all depend on what kind of drops you get and what kind of trades you can do. I don't know if they explicitly mention trades, but I imagine, at least I would hope, that would be something that would come back. D3 without trades kind of sucked, to be honest. But the thing is, like, based on this information, what makes it even better is just like, hey, if I run a barbarian that like just pummels stuff with a sword, one-handed sword, which is really fast attack speed, or this guy behind me in the leaderboard has a two-handed sword, he's got a different build, but he loves to play that way. I mean, perfect. That's what I want to see. And if that spurs on competition and theory crafting, which is a huge deal in ARPGs, it's like, min-maxing, as Soviet said, how do I make sure I get the most amount of damage or whatever? But some people could be like, well, screw the damage. I want the attack speed, because like if I put this effect in, I could like almost perma-stun a mob or a boss, and then that saves me on being viable to just take less damage. So like there's a lot of ways you could play the game, and that's what I want to come back to, is something that tells me, hey, you come up with a build you like to play with, and let's see what you can do.
Yeah, no, I feel you 100% there. Like Diablo 3 really bored me at the end because it got to the point where, new season, you just look up like you said, what the best gear is and then hope to get good drops for it. There was nothing that you on your own could discover that would be like outside the meta that would actually be like really effective against it. And like that kind of theory crafting, like you said, is always like one of my favorite parts of the games. So if they're actually going to let it be not always have one right build, but have a variety that depending on how you play or how you want to play can all be successful, then I think that'll be way more interesting. That's like I play a lot of Borderlands 3, and at this point that game's like a year and a half old, but I've never seen like any of the classes that you can run have a set build that everyone agrees on is the best. There's still to this day like a ton of debate on should you be running this these skills or these guns or whatever. And if Diablo 4 could bring back a lot more of that, I'd be so hype.
Right, and I think a lot of what we said today, just as an overall conclusion to this whole video, a pretty positive reception to what they had to say in the quarterly update. So I'm looking forward to the game coming out. Again, this is probably a very long time away. I don't know, maybe 2 years from now the game will finally be out. But I mean, again, they'll be updating us consistently throughout the year as to what they're updating with the game. Probably get details on an alpha, probably get details on a beta whenever they're actually going to finally do that. But that is going to wrap things up here with us. Appreciate everybody who came by to watch the video. Again, let us know down below in the comments what you think about our discussion here about Diablo 4's quarterly update. And with that said, hope you guys enjoyed, and we will see you all in the next one.
Peace out, everybody.
See ya.
Peace.